Welcome, everyone, to episode 12 of the MBE Enterprise Podcast, where we talk about money, business, and entrepreneurship with some of the brightest minds I know. Today, I am joined by Caroline Anderson, co-founder, entrepreneur extraordinaire of Epiblock. Caroline, how are we doing today?
So good. So happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm always excited for these episodes, really looking forward to them. And I want to start off right away, Caroline, with Epiblock. Let's talk about the business that kind of connected us in a way. I mean, if you guys didn't have that company, we never would have met in the first place. What were the origins of Epiblock? Kind of take us all back to how it all began, the road, the pathway that's taken you where we are now, and then kind of where you guys are at now with it.
Yeah, so our president and CEO, Asher, he suffered with some really terrible nosebleeds growing up and as a little kid. And he kind of was looking ways to stop his nosebleeds. And he found a different method of stopping nosebleed was found in the mouth. And because he is a very entrepreneurial minded guy, he kind of looked for different ways just at home, like to stop the nosebleed. And once he discovered this method, he wanted to develop a product. So he actually Googled how to mold silicone like in his basement and came up with a little device and would purposely give himself nosebleeds and test it. And when he found something that worked, and there was a business competition going on at St. Thomas, he developed an idea to make this into a business product. And he entered that in a competition called the Fowler at St. Thomas. Really got that rolling and ended up placing first in the competition. And after that, he kind of was doing other things with school, just life got busy. He had like IP on the device and always knew in the back of the mind that he would pick it up, but just was kind of focusing on other things. And then my senior year of college, we were placed in seating in our entrepreneurship class in alphabetical order. And he's Asher Anderson, I'm Caroline Anderson, and our other partner, Colin Brunet, so AAB. We were all sitting next to each other and ended up just connecting really well. We were doing group projects together, and we just connected, and we were actually developing a different idea, which wasn't the best idea, but it was really fun and great experience. And then when Asher mentioned his previous kind of idea and whether or not we should revamp it, we took it to eFest where we met. And it did really well there. So that's kind of like our story and like how we got involved and how Epiblock was born.
So, can you describe a little more kind of what exactly Epiblock does now? Because it shifted a little bit from the nosebleeds concept that was originally there.
Yep. So it was originally intended to be just for nosebleeds, like Asher's nosebleed problem. And when he was talking to his uncle, who is a facial and cosmetic surgeon, he learned that there could be other applications for the device as well because the method controls the facial blood flow. And so it actually could be used in surgical and cosmetic procedures as well. So we found that we could use Epiblock in a $5 billion market, which is definitely a huge and exciting thing that we're really blessed. Yeah.
So Epiblock obviously stemmed from Asher's original problem. I
Mm-hmm.
think that a lot of people would agree that a lot of entrepreneurial ventures stem from, it might seem obvious, but stem from people's problems and them taking the initiative to actually solve them. How big of a difference do you think maybe in whether it's past entrepreneurial ideas that you've had in particular, or just kind of a thought exercise right now, how big of a difference do you think it is when you have an entrepreneur who has a problem and like that sparks them into becoming an entrepreneur because they want to fix that, versus an entrepreneur who's like, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know a problem that I want to fix yet, or I don't know a product or service that I want to provide yet. Do you think that do you have any maybe like strategies for people who would like try and do that? I realize that's something that you haven't exactly had to do with this company, but anything in that regard?
Yeah, I think that like finding a problem, even if it's like not a new innovation, whether that be like you find a problem that people in your neighborhood have dirty cars and you want to start a car washing business, just finding a gap in the market and where something is needed and there is a problem is always a great thing to go off. Having a need, I think, is always like a very critical thing when you're starting a business. Obviously there's things that like go viral and are really like interesting products that are fun. But I feel like most big successes in the entrepreneurial world kind of stem always from a problem, even if they aren't exactly the most innovative, like I said, with like a car washing, as long as you're able to find that kind of need and like want in the market.
I love that you brought that up about the car wash and not having to be extremely innovative. Because I think that's one of the things that I've actually tackled in my own head in the past. And I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on this as well. Is I think entrepreneurs get in the mindset that like they have to create this massive innovative product or service. And a thing that comes up with that is like doing something new. So being first to market with something completely new. And I think something that gets overlooked a lot, at least maybe for me anyway, is the idea of actually just doing it better, right? Like, once again, it seems obvious, but instead of reinventing the wheel or actually inventing a new wheel and innovating completely, doing something that's maybe already been done or is being done and actually making it better as opposed to completely changing it, I think is a different way of looking at entrepreneurship. And once again, it's like kind of obvious, but at the same time, we're always thinking about the new technology, the new this or that that's just completely innovative. And so I think, you mentioned something like a car wash, for example, or just anything like that, small scale, the prototypical like lawn mowing service or like small things like that, that if you can just find a way to do it better, or sometimes even just offer it at all if it's not being offered currently, there is a potential market and demand for that. Would you agree, Caroline?
I would totally agree with that. There was a case study that really resonated with me in college, kind of that. That's like a mix between like innovative and like something that already existed. We read about the company Dry Bar. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Um, it's a women's hair like blowout place. And so basically, it's a very successful company. They have multiple like right around the area. But they noticed that like hairstylists that you go to didn't want to like just blow out your hair for like 20 or $30 because it takes up their like time and they don't want to like see you. So Dry Bar basically like just specializes in blowing out girls' hair for like a big event so that you basically don't have to bother your hairstylist. And I just thought that this was such an amazing concept. It seems like so simple and you wouldn't even think like just a blowout place, but the company is super successful and kind of like optimized on that like need and like gap in the market, even though it already existed.
You bring up, Caroline, that gap in the market, and that's one of the things we wanted to talk about today. What are some strategies, or maybe have there been problems that you guys have faced so far with Epiblock, as far as pivots you've had to make, or being adaptable with different things? You obviously brought up how it was originally, strictly for kind of the nosebleeds and just in commonplace nosebleeds, as opposed to now how it's shifted. Have there been any other major shifts that you guys have had to face that have led to you guys maybe analyzing the market on a broad level and determining which area you guys wanted to focus on going forward or pivot to?
Yeah, I think like originally when Epiblock was created, the consumer market or like B2C is like the thing that most times you like think of. But we noticed after talking to a lot of physician and doctors in like the ER and urgent care that nosebleeds is one of the biggest struggles that they're like facing right now, and one of the most like underdeveloped markets. There's not new nosebleed products really being made, just the typical things. So we didn't even realize this until we really got to talking to people and like understanding problems, and that this is actually like a huge market that we are looking to tap into and honestly are targeting the most right now.
Definitely. I think that adaptability plays a huge role, being able to pivot if necessary with market gaps, but then also actually doing the research. Sometimes isn't always the most exciting part. Sometimes it is when you're discovering new things, but like you mentioned, you'd go out, you'd go talk to those people, get that firsthand information right from the source, and that can help you oftentimes drive where your company wants to go. I think that's an interesting thing I always think about as far as um, innovation within a company and adaptability goes. People talk about pivoting all the time and like how they could potentially pivot this way or that way. And one thing I think I've always thought of is like, just listen to your customers, listen to the customer feedback, listen to the people who are in that area. They'll tell you exactly where you need to go. You don't need to think like, okay, I have this idea. I think it stops a lot of people too, because you have an idea and you're like, well, if it doesn't work, I got to think of where I can pivot to, or my backup plan of this, or where I'm going to go. And I don't know where I'm going to pivot. I won't even start it. I don't know. It's like, just take the first step, jump into it, and then you'll get connections. Trust the fact that you'll get connections along the way, and get additional information that should tell you like where you need to go. Or I don't get feedback. Well, talk to your customers. Like, you probably have somebody who's dealing with the issue. If you're solving a problem, there's obviously people out there that have the problem. So talk to them and figure out how to do it better. Once again, little things, they seem obvious, but sometimes I won't even think of it. I'll go blank, and then I'm like, oh, why don't I just ask this person? Like, that'd probably be pretty smart. Um, Another thing we touched on here too is this starting out as an entrepreneur. Caroline, what was your kind of first entrepreneurial idea, or maybe the moment that you kind of realized that this is something you wanted to delve into and take a chance with?
Yeah, going off the point of the first like entrepreneurial endeavor, in the fourth grade, I started my own little dog walking business in my neighborhood. It was quite the empire. I had a lot of different clients in the neighborhood. I was going door to door. It was it was bringing in some cash as a fifth and fourth grader. I was pretty popular in the neighborhood. And I still am so connected with my neighbors. So honestly, it was just an amazing experience. But that kind of like, I think always is the origin of like where my entrepreneurial spirit kind of stemmed. I just was so excited to like create something of my own. I called it Caroline's Canines, printed off all these little flyers. I just loved kind of the hustle and the grind and being able to make my own money, even at a really young age, um, and setting my own schedule. So I think that had always been kind of the root of my entrepreneurship. And going off for when I like officially decided I would be like, I'm an entrepreneurship major, to put that out there, where I would be pursuing that path as like my major. I went into college actually as a psychology major, and I was determined to like do good in the world. That was always my dream, and help other people. And so I took a psychology class my freshman year, and I took an entrepreneurship class because it was one of the requirements. And the professor in my entrepreneurship class just brought so much energy and just had us creating. And I just like fell in love with it in that class. I loved the excitement of like creating your own thing. And I had so many people tell me, since I had the whole dog walking thing, it stemmed into dog treats and dog bathing and dog sitting. Everyone told me that entrepreneurship would be my path, but I didn't truly know until I took that class and then took the psychology class and then learned that I could still do good within business. So I'm a sustainability minor, and hopefully I can pair the two together, do good and business together. So that's kind of my like origin story of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's awesome. You brought up there a good topic we can dive into too, which is mentorship. The idea kind of that professor, you didn't directly bring up mentorship, I guess, but my mind went to that when you talk about the professor having such a big impact on you, and showing you kind of in that class that that is what you wanted to do, and a route that you could take to do good in the world as well. So, Caroline, how has mentorship kind of played a role for you? Did that professor turn out to be, a more long term mentor for you? Was there other people in your? I'm sure there was others, but any other particular people in your life that played huge roles? And then what maybe lesson did you get out of it that was the biggest from any of them?
Yeah, I mean, that specific professor, I actually had him again in another class. And one class, he just randomly had me stand up in front of the entire class for 40 minutes and present my homework assignment. I was the only student that did it in the class for 40 minutes. And he would have people raise their hand and say what I could do better. And honestly, it was like one of the most helpful things, like honestly, a life changing moment. And that professor, even though I'm not still connected, and I don't even know if he would remember me, like played such a big role in just like my development as like an entrepreneur and like as someone who does public speaking and things like that. I think all of the professors I've had at St. Thomas have played a really large role. I've had like a lot of close connections with them. And I met my two business partners now in a class, and our professor, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Campo, were mentors, and they still meet with us. And they genuinely want the best for us and want us to succeed and guide us through navigating this like new world. I don't think Epiblock would be anywhere without mentors. Like we are nowhere near professionals or experts, I should say, um, in this like medical device territory. So mentorship, I think, is essential for us to do well and to get that good feedback and insight, um, to really lead us to success.
I think there's a lot of things I could delve into there. One of the last things you kind of mentioned is how you guys, wouldn't be here without mentorship, and that they help you so much, even in areas that you're not experts in. And I think that's an important distinguishment for entrepreneurs to make as well, whether it's through a business partner who has a specialization in a skill that you maybe don't have, or whether it's through mentors that are able to kind of guide you through territories that you have never traversed before and they have. I think the idea of thinking that you need to know everything is a common misconception when it comes to entrepreneurship, because at the beginning, while you might be doing a lot of things, a wide variety of the tasks, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in all of them. You can welcome guidance from, mentors, or eventually bring on team members who are legitimate experts in the field that you need them in. So I think that's a huge point to make. And another thing you brought up, Caroline, was how that experience in that class really kind of maybe flipped a switch for you in how you approached, or how you thought of like public speaking, for example. And I can attest to this from that competition, actually, how you were an incredible public speaker on stage, as far as how you presented the idea and how you took the audience, kind of captivated their attention, and then took them through the story. For those listeners, it was just like a 90-second, sub 90-second elevator pitch, but it kind of, it was a story, and it gave you the sense that you were really, really doing good with that company. And I remember thinking that, I was like, wow, that was a well done presentation, of the business. are there tips that you have for people regarding public speaking, or things that you have found have maybe benefited you in that regard? And then also, how does telling a story kind of play the role when you're presenting a business to others, whether it's, investors, or just people who are curious about it?
Yeah, we have done a lot of different presentations as a team, and we have found that people really engage with the story. So it's always something like Asher's Nosebleeds that really like draws the attention and gets people kind of emotionally connected. And I think starting that way and getting people to feel a connection to what you're doing or what problem you're solving is one of the most important things. And just like being concise with your wording and not dragging on, also, I feel like is like what I would say is a really important thing. Get your point across and do it in a way that you would want to listen to as well. So I always present to like my friends and like get feedback from them and see if it's something they enjoyed listening to, or something that we need to improve upon. But we ran that script through so many people, and like every presentation we do, we always get feedback.
I think being concise in your words and not dragging things on is something that I, as a speaker, definitely need to work on a little bit at least. Because if you ask anyone, they'll be like, first off, Matt never shuts up. Second off, if he's telling a story, like, I try and be better about not dragging it out and giving literally every single little detail, and minute point that's irrelevant maybe to the story. But I notice it when other people do it. It's funny how that works. You notice it when other people do it, and then sometimes when you're doing it, I'm like, okay, I got to get to the point here. Like, I'm losing the audience, sort of thing. So I think that is an extremely, extremely helpful tip. Other than just the basic, like not tripping over your words or not getting extremely nervous. Being concise with your speech, I think, is really very important. Caroline, going back to the kind of the entrepreneurship side of things, was there a business idea? I know you mentioned the dog walking one was kind of your origin story. Was there a business idea that you didn't act on and maybe wish you would have in the past, that it's maybe a company has blown up in that area, or maybe not, and you just think it would be extremely interesting?
Well, starting out freshman year, I'll say this to preface it, I'm a vegan. So I thought it would be so amazing to have a vegan restaurant, and at this restaurant have little teacup pigs, as kind of like a display of like, you're not eating the pigs, and they're like cute and whatnot. And that's a really fun idea. I also was like hot out of high school, but after going to college and learning the stats on like the entrepreneurship within the restaurant industry, definitely terrifying, and definitely not a very feasible business plan. I mean, it could be successful. I don't know. Someone's probably going to go out and do that right after this podcast
You'll
or
inspire
something.
somebody to do
Yeah.
that.
I'll go to it. I'll enjoy it. But there's probably not like a huge art audience in Minnesota that want to go to a restaurant with pigs in it. So I think just like learning more about like entrepreneurship and how to like avoid, I guess, more like dangerous territory. I'm not saying that you shouldn't like go into the restaurant industry if you have like a really good idea, but I think like staying away from like certain concepts and such, I've definitely learned more about in school. And I definitely was selective in the way that I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I wasn't gonna just start something without putting a lot of thought into it.
I think the kind of underlying meaning that you might be getting at there, or at least kind of how I interpret that, is extremely important, in that as an entrepreneur, you need to, like you said, you shouldn't never take risks, right? But you need to take calculated risks, and you can't take so many risks that where it's like, if this fails, it's over, right? You can't, you got to try and avoid those because you're going to fail potentially a majority of the time, right? So you need to have your failures be as mitigated as they can be, while also having kind of the upside growth potential. But in order to grow, you do have to take risks. So I think that the idea of calculated risks, the concept of never kind of not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Like diversification. I always think of that. I people know I'm a numbers guy, finance person. I always think of it that way. You know, similar to investing. You don't want to have all your chips in one basket, for example, or all your eggs in one basket, and then have it not work out. Well, then you're screwed, right? As opposed to, you know, diversification to a certain extent. But like we said, in entrepreneurship, you have to take the risks. Similar to investing, there is always an intrinsic risk. So yeah, definitely. I think that's an extremely good point to make as well. What about, Caroline, essential qualities that you think, in your experience, I'm sure you've met a ton of amazing entrepreneurs. You've probably also met some that weren't as successful, didn't maybe stick with it long, or whatever the case may be. What do you think some essential qualities are that really separate and distinguish those top tier entrepreneurs that you've had the pleasure of meeting, uh, from the ones who, you know, didn't quite make it?
Yeah, I think people who are really successful are able to accept criticism with their like current approach. I like people like to say like nobody wants you to call their baby ugly, but you should, I think, want people to call your baby ugly, if that makes sense. I think that receiving feedback from people, like just listening to what you're presenting, is what is going to take your concept like even further. And I think if you can't embrace change as it comes, um then it just is going to get swallowed up. So I think being able to accept criticism and then apply and do something with that criticism.
You brought up the idea of people not wanting others to call their baby ugly. And what I would say with that is that at least it shows they cared enough to the extent to comment, right? Because to a certain extent, if they care so little about whether it's your baby as in your business, or I guess literally your child, um, if they care so little that they won't even say anything, you're not able to get any feedback at all, and you kind of have no idea. You don't have any idea really if it's good or bad. You know, at least if they say the idea is bad, or the baby's ugly, I guess, like at least you know, kind of, you know what I mean, and you know where to, in the business sense, you know where to go from there. You know that something needs to change, for example. And I think that's also a very fine line in entrepreneurship, at least in my experience, because oftentimes you do have to have the true, I mean, love for your idea. Like, you have to be very dedicated to your idea. And so then sometimes it can be extremely difficult to take that criticism, like you're saying, and actually apply changes. So I think that is why that's extremely important. You have to be in love with it, but you have to be willing also to accept that changes or pivot points might need to be made, and that, you know, adjustments will need to be made, but then just also the idea that you have to be in love with the process kind of it, and the growth that it's going to take to get there, because otherwise, you know, the odds of your idea being absolutely perfect right away are pretty low. I think most people can speak to that. So yeah, I mean, another extremely important point there. Moving on to kind of something that I think we'll talk about quite a bit here, and I found interesting because I didn't know that your guys' team was brought together because of a last name, because of the alphabet, essentially. Um, what about the idea of starting with solopreneur when you started maybe a dog walking business, obviously on your own, as opposed to starting a business with two other co-founders? What are some of the differences, maybe challenges, but also benefits of doing things, as a team?
Yeah, to kind of go back to the dog walking thing, I started off with one business partner in the fourth grade. Um, she ended up not having the same love and drive for like walking dogs every day after school. And we kind of like broke that connection And like I ended up just doing it all by myself, and I had my solopreneur kind of journey, and I think that it wouldn't have been so successful if I was with someone else, because I really got to deeply know my neighbors and build that trust. But with Epiblock, I think that we three work very well together and bring different things to the table. We all just kind of bounce off each other, bring up points, bring up concern, positivity, different things. And it's like just such a dynamic relationship, I think. And it really, I think, makes the business do well. I think it would be very feasible for Asher to handle all of this alone, and he did in the beginning. But what he tells to me and Colin is that having people to have your back and bring in different ideas and skill sets just was able to inspire more excitement and growth within the company. And we've just seen it take off so much with all of our different like values and skill sets. And I think that the three of us definitely bring some power to the team versus taking it on.
How have you guys kind of gone about divvying up roles within the organization? Is there a set is there a set role structure where one person does this, the other does this, and the other does this, and they don't overlap a ton? Or is it more of you are all kind of dealing in similar areas? You're all kind of handling all different categories to a smaller extent, or really specializing as far as that goes?
Yeah, right now we are so not super early in the process, but we're still growing and just finalizing the last like rendition of our design. So we've all been hands on deck each day, um, going on all these meetings so that we can all kind of hear the feedback and like make the best product. We've definitely talked about different kind of roles and like our different skill sets. So I think a little bit later down the line, those more distinct roles will come about. But right now, we kind of need every hands on deck getting this product all finalized. And we kind of divvy up different roles and what we're doing based off of our skill sets, but we're pretty much all hands on deck.
Do you ever, Caroline, reflect on the fact that you guys were brought together by essentially pure chance based on the alphabet? Like a lot of teams starting out, that's something that really surprised me. I wouldn't have guessed that, because so many teams starting out when they're put together are, well, not put together, I guess. They're picked, they're handpicked. Like, I need to bring this person on because of this, and this person because of this. Like, it usually stems maybe from one person's original idea, but there might be two people right from the start, and they just know their roles, or they bring on, like I said, a person who has a particular set of skills. Whereas you guys were just literally not even for Epiblock, right? It was a different business kind of in the class and put together. How do you think, to me in my head, and maybe I'm just crazy, it brings me back to kind of the whole like nature versus nurture argument of like, you can kind of put this team together perfectly, and they should work, but then they still have to kind of blend, right? As opposed to you guys were just kind of like put together with no particular thought in mind, like literally just last names. And you've been able to adapt so well and work together so well that you've obviously continued with a full-on startup company. So do you ever reflect at all, I guess, on that, and just the fact that it was kind of just chance, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a really funny thing to bring up when people ask like how we met and stuff like that, because we didn't know each other before that like class. Um, but when we were working on this concept together, we were given the chance to submit it in the business plan competition at St. Thomas. And our teacher was like, "Oh, you guys should really do it. You have a really strong argument." And we ended up getting, I think, like fourth, or in the top three teams like made it in. And our business model got crushed by like a law that was like passed the day before. It was like a nonprofit business, and like the way we were revenue generating got like squashed by the free meal plan that was implemented. I don't know if you remember that in Minnesota.
Yeah, do you wanna go talk about that original idea a little bit more, just to give listeners some context? I kind of remember.
Yeah, so it was a nonprofit organization. We started in class with a problem, and ours was childhood obesity. And we use human centered design approach. I think that's what it was called. To develop basically a business plan to solve that problem based off feedback we received from real people. So we just did a ton of interviewing of people to come to a solution. And it was a nonprofit that used hydroponics farming. So we would ship a crate that was like gardening to these schools. And it basically would be like fresh vegetables and food to the school that we'd sell for the price of school lunches. And it would make us money so that we could give them this food and then be a nonprofit. It's a very thorough business plan I'd really have to dive into, but basically we'd be gardening food to give to elementary schools, high schools, places like that were actually healthy and good for you versus the normal food. And so our revenue structure basically got squashed by free meals being implemented. It's pretty hard to like charge for a meal when they're free now. So we ended up getting like one away from going to the finals. And we spent so much time like outside of class developing this, making like a 25-page business plan just for a competition that we ended up not even placing in. Um, and we just kind of were hanging out more as like friends and students at that point because we were spending hours outside of the classroom, and we were all very busy, but we just like cared a lot about this. And so I think that just taking in how much we were passionate about creating something and like staying up till midnight making a business plan for a competition, we kind of just like learned a lot about each other, and that we had the same drive as like entrepreneurs to really like make something. Um Also, me and Colin's skill set, I feel like are very different. Asher was the one who has the idea Epiblock, so he did handpick me and Colin in a way, I think. Because he asked us to do this competition with him with his idea. And I think that me and Colin bring very different things to the table. So it's kind of like a perfect mix, I think. We're all so different and we all bring different things, but we all have that drive as young entrepreneurs to really make something happen and use our skill sets to like the best we can.
So complementary skill sets you talk about, that obviously plays a huge role in building out a quality team when it comes to business. And then also I think kind of like similar, oftentimes similar like core values, I would say, maybe not all value structures, but like at least having some overlapping on some major things, I guess, to work well together. Um, Besides the skills and like values aspect, are there any like conscious decisions that you guys have had to make on an individual level to really help your team building, kind of help your team's not morale, but the just how well you guys blend together, right? So have there been particular things that you guys find works well for, maybe settling disputes if they were to arise, or issues that might come up that you kind of have to get over as a team, just ways that you interact that you have found that have been beneficial to you guys at all?
Well, you might relate to this, but I think there's something beautiful about like a team of three. Like, usually if I have a certain like thing I'm super excited about, but maybe someone else isn't super excited about, there's always like one extra person to like maybe make a more rational thought. Maybe I got super crazy and wanted to try something new and like I think that something about 3 is just so amazing. It's almost like a vote. And I think that even after, if I'm the one that has a different idea that others don't agree with, I can kind of see after when 2 people are telling me that it might not be the best decision. I think having more of a group than maybe a one-on-one relationship, I don't know. I don't know if you can relate to that, but I think something about a team of 3 is really dynamic.
Yeah, and it also gives you kind of, if it's a team of 2 and the other person disagrees with you, you only get to see kind of their viewpoint and their argument of why it is. Versus, I think what you were kind of saying there, when you have 2 people that differ with you, you're kind of like, okay, maybe I should think a little more. Like, but neither of them necessarily agree with me, and I get to see it from 2 different angles because they obviously don't see things the exact same way, but they've come to the same conclusion nonetheless. So I think, yeah, and I definitely can say that I've experienced that before. I know with our company, we were talking about, it had to do with kind of which kind of target markets, which one we were going to attack. And we'd been working on one, and, we're analyzing the data that we'd received from that, and then looking forward, whether we wanted to pivot, whether we wanted to continue focusing on this particular market area, and landscape. And I think that a prime example I think of is when, one of us was like, we got to move on, and the other one was like, we got to stay in this one. And then kind of having that third person who is like an intermediary of like, okay, here's what you're saying, like, here's what you're saying, I get them both, I think we should maybe do X, Y, or Z because of this, and because we've already put certain efforts into this or that, whatever. The specifics are not important, more so as the idea of having that third person to kind of mediate at times too. Not necessarily a 2-on-1, but if it's a 1v1, and then the third person can kind of, explain to, maybe in our case, I could explain to Ben what the other Matt is thinking in a different way, and then I can explain to Matt what Ben is thinking in a different way, and kind of get them to see eye to eye a little better. I think would be an example of that, and kind of what you're getting at there with teams of 3. Another thing, Caroline, I want to talk about, and you mentioned you guys being extremely busy at that time, or Asher was obviously extremely busy when he was doing it on his own. How have you guys been able to balance work-life balance and work-student life balance, as I would say, with a lot of these young entrepreneurs who are oftentimes still in college when they're starting out? Are there any techniques, scheduling strategies, that you use, or just speak on that a little bit in general?
Yeah, we have like downloaded like a calendar platform to really like organize and put in like whenever one of us is working or we have a family event. We basically have all of our lives out in like one shared app, and it has helped so much to just understand what times we can like work around. If someone has to leave for a shift earlier, we might start earlier in the day to get our hours in that we need to, and scheduling meetings so that we can all be there and listening. So I think just knowing and understanding the different hurdles that are going to come up in like busy schedules with school and with work, um, to have that like shared platform, even if it's like dinner with grandma, it's just nice to know and kind of get a read of like what everyone's doing and plan accordingly.
Scheduling is obviously huge, and you mentioned how you obviously schedule collectively, and having that structure kind of, but then also being flexible with it. I talked about this previously with Aditya on episode 10, and it was kind of that idea of having the structure so that you can hold yourself accountable in a way, and have goals that you have set, and know that you're orchestrating your day and scheduling out your day in a way that will meet those goals, hopefully, but then also being flexible and being able to make adjustments as you see fit. Because like we brought up in that episode, it was the idea of, radical changes, when people are trying to make radical changes in their lives, and they'll revamp their schedule on January 1st and be like, all right, for the next year, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, every day. And like, it's a step in the right direction because you are thinking about scheduling it, and you are scheduling it, I guess. But at the same time, if you're not able to be flexible with that and realize and not flexible as in, I don't like doing this, or, if it's something that still needs to get done, you still need to get it done. And that's where goals come in as well. But the idea of being flexible enough to adjust where you do need to adjust, and, as you see fit, and make changes that are necessary, I think is something that is extremely important, to have the flexibility combined with the, constructive schedule that you're working together on.
Mhm.
Caroline, what would be some just general advice you could give to future entrepreneurs, really just in any aspect, whether it's starting up, whether it's operations, whether it's ideation, whether it's team building, marketing, anything that you can think of that you think would be the best advice to give them?
Yeah, I would say we were talking about calculated risks before. And I think that I may have expressed like this sort of like caution, but also as an entrepreneur and like wanting to be an entrepreneur, you have to be able to take on risk. Um, like there's always like people say like high risk, high return. And like you'll never know unless you do take a risk, and obviously be strategic, but embrace that risk and accept that there could be failure, and that even through failure, you could still learn something. We have no idea if Epiblock is going to be some ginormous thing, or it could, not be, but just knowing that this process, I will learn so much about the business world and medical device specifically, kind of just makes the whole thing worth it to me. And I think learning and failing are just a part of the journey. And embracing that has really been helpful as we come across certain failures and we come across different successes. Just enjoying the process and learning from it.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Caroline?
Oh boy, this this question is really it's a big question. I don't know exactly where I see myself in 5 years, but I hope that I'm doing something that drives me and makes me happy. I think in life, I've always just known, whether that be my own business or a company I'm working for, that I want to enjoy and feel excited about what I'm doing. So that's kind of why I picked this path. Um, Epiblock really elates joy and excitement from me. So I hope even if I'm still doing or I'm doing something different, that I'm doing something that makes me happy and excited and wanting to do more of it.
I think those are wise words for anyone, to strive to be doing something every day that makes you really excited to wake up that day. I think is the ultimate goal, and ultimately where you should always be, looking to be 5 years in the future, because then you're just always improving, Caroline, it was really fun having you on. This was a fun episode. I enjoyed it. Time flies by as always, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I also wish you guys the best of luck, and you the best of luck, not only with Epiblock, but also just in every other area of life as well. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so fun.